Steelers Nation, there's one signing that has flown under the radar for much of the fan base, but it could end up being one of Omar Khan's smartest moves of the offseason. While most of the attention has been focused on the bigger names joining the roster, one addition arrived in Pittsburgh, bringing something that no amount of money can buy, a genuine connection to the city and to the Steelers culture. Jaquan Brisker is coming home. He grew up in the Pittsburgh area, went to high school here, starred at Penn State, and now he'll have the opportunity to wear the black and gold of the franchise he grew up watching. For most players, changing teams is simply another chapter in their career. For Brisker, this feels like much more than that. It's a chance to represent the city that helped shape the person and player he has become, and that's where the big question comes in. Can playing at home truly elevate a player's performance? Or is the emotional aspect being overhyped once the season begins and the pressure starts to build? In my opinion, that connection does matter, not because it guarantees great performances, but because it can fuel a player's commitment, motivation, and determination to represent the jersey on every snap. At the end of the day, though, Brisker will still have to prove it on the field. Emotion alone doesn't win football games, but when it's combined with talent and dedication, it can become a real advantage. Now I want to hear from you, Steelers Nation. Do you believe Jaquan Brisker has everything it takes to become one of the biggest surprises on this defense this season? Or do you think fans are setting expectations too high simply because this is a homecoming story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because today we're breaking down why this signing could have a much bigger impact than most people realize. Because the Steelers signed Brisker to a one-year contract worth $5 million, making this one of the classic low-risk, high-upside moves. At just 27 years old, he still has plenty of football ahead of him, but there is also a reason this deal wasn't a long-term commitment. Pittsburgh clearly believes the talent is there. Now it's Brisker's job to prove he deserves to be part of the franchise's future beyond this season. Looking strictly at his recent production, Brisker finished last season ranked 45th out of 91 eligible NFL safeties according to Pro Football Focus. Those numbers won't immediately jump off the page, but they also don't tell the complete story. The Steelers are not asking him to become an all-pro overnight. They're asking him to fit a defensive identity that appears to be changing under new defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, and that is where this signing starts making a lot more sense. If you study Brisker's game, one characteristic stands above everything else. He is an extremely physical football player. He attacks downhill, enjoys contact, and plays with the kind of aggression Steelers fans have appreciated for decades. He isn't afraid to deliver big hits, step into the box against the run, or throw his body around when necessary. That mentality fits naturally with the kind of football traditionally associated with Pittsburgh, especially in the AFC North, where games are often decided by toughness, physicality, and winning battles at the line of scrimmage. However, his value extends beyond simply being a hard hitter. Brisker has also shown himself to be a reliable tackler, which becomes increasingly important considering how Patrick Graham is expected to deploy his safeties this season. Instead of relying heavily on the traditional single-high safety looks that Steelers fans became accustomed to for years, Graham reportedly wants to utilize far more two-high safety alignments before the snap. That subtle schematic adjustment completely changes the responsibilities of both safeties. Rather than having one safety consistently playing deep while the other spends more time near the line of scrimmage, both safeties are expected to become interchangeable. They need to support the run, blitz effectively, disguise coverages, and rotate throughout the defense without giving quarterbacks an easy pre-snap read. That versatility becomes essential, and Brisker appears to possess many of the traits required for that role. His pairing with Deshaun Elliott could become one of the more intriguing combinations on the defense. Elliott has already established himself as one of the league's most dependable tackling and blitzing safeties. Adding Brisker beside him gives Pittsburgh another defensive back capable of contributing in similar ways. Instead of having clearly defined strong and free safety responsibilities, both players could operate in multiple alignments depending on the offensive formation and game situation. That flexibility creates opportunities for Patrick Graham to disguise pressure packages, rotate coverages late, and make life significantly more difficult for opposing quarterbacks. When both safeties can blitz, fill running lanes, and rotate seamlessly into coverage responsibilities, offensive coordinators have a much harder time identifying where pressure might come from before the snap. But perhaps the biggest benefit of signing Brisker isn't actually about Brisker himself. It may completely change how the Steelers can utilize Jalen Ramsey throughout the defense. Last season, Ramsey spent time playing safety despite spending the majority of his career at cornerback. While he handled the transition reasonably well, it was obvious that safety wasn't necessarily maximizing his greatest strengths. With Brisker now entering the picture, Pittsburgh gains the flexibility to move Ramsey into what could become one of the most important positions within Patrick Graham's defense: the big nickel role. That position demands a player capable of defending the run almost like a linebacker while still possessing the coverage skills of a defensive back. In two high safety structures, someone has to replace the physical presence removed from the box when both safeties align deeper before the snap. Ramsey appears perfectly built for that responsibility. Few defensive backs have been as effective against the run over the past decade. His physicality, instincts, willingness to attack blockers, and ability to diagnose plays make him an ideal fit for playing closer to the line of scrimmage. At the same time, he still possesses the coverage ability to handle receivers from the slot while reading quarterbacks and making plays on the football. His value as a blitzer should not be overlooked either. When you begin combining Ramsey, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Deshaun Elliott, Jaquan Brisker, and Pittsburgh's defensive front, Patrick Graham suddenly has multiple legitimate pressure threats that can attack offenses from virtually every angle without becoming predictable. That may ultimately become the hidden value of this signing. Jaquan Brisker isn't simply filling a roster spot. He may be the player who allows the Steelers to unlock the full flexibility of an entirely new defensive system. What do you think about the Steelers bringing Jaquan Brisker back home on a one-year prove-it deal, and do you believe he has what it takes to become a long-term piece of Pittsburgh's defense? Of course, Brisker is not arriving in Pittsburgh as a flawless player, and that's exactly why this contract is structured the way it is. If he were coming off an elite season with no questions surrounding his game, the Steelers likely would have had to commit significant long-term money to acquire him. Instead, they found themselves in a position to add a talented player who still has something to prove, and that could end up being a tremendous value if everything falls into place. The biggest football concern surrounding Brisker is his consistency in coverage. While he can certainly contribute against the pass, coverage has not been the strongest part of his game throughout his NFL career. Last season, he finished with a 54. One coverage grade according to Pro Football Focus, ranking 66th among 93 eligible safeties. Those numbers don't suggest that he's incapable of covering receivers or tight ends, but they do indicate that this isn't the area where he's expected to make the biggest impact. That's another reason why Patrick Graham's defensive philosophy could benefit Brisker. Rather than asking him to consistently play isolated man coverage against dynamic receivers, the system appears designed to maximize his strengths. His ability to attack downhill, defend the run, disguise blitzes, and rotate through multiple assignments may become far more valuable than asking him to be a pure coverage specialist. The Steelers aren't necessarily looking for him to become the centerpiece of the secondary and pass coverage. They need him to execute his role within a much larger defensive structure. If Brisker performs that role well, the ripple effect could be enormous. Deshaun Elliott can continue doing what he does best without carrying an overwhelming workload. Jalen Ramsey can remain in the big nickel position where his versatility becomes even more valuable. Patrick Graham gains another defender capable of disguising pressure before the snap. Suddenly, opposing quarterbacks are forced to spend extra time identifying where blitzes may come from instead of immediately recognizing Pittsburgh's defensive intentions. There is, however, another concern that goes well beyond football performance, and it's probably the biggest question surrounding Brisker's future. His concussion history cannot be ignored. Throughout his career, concussions have caused him to miss significant time, and that naturally creates uncertainty for any team considering a long-term investment. The encouraging news is that he managed to play all 17 games last season with the Chicago Bears, showing that he could get through an entire NFL schedule without suffering another concussion. That certainly gives the Steelers optimism entering this season. At the same time, his aggressive style of play naturally raises concern. Brisker doesn't avoid contact. In many ways, he seeks it out. That's part of what makes him such an exciting defender to watch, but it's also what makes durability an ongoing conversation. Every tackle, every collision, and every downhill hit hit becomes something worth monitoring because of his medical history. That reality likely influenced Pittsburgh's decision to offer only a one-year contract. From the organization's perspective, it represents a calculated investment. If Brisker stays healthy, fits seamlessly into Patrick Graham's defense, and produces at a high level, the Steelers will have every opportunity to negotiate another contract after the season. If injuries become an issue again, or his performance doesn't justify a longer commitment, the organization maintains flexibility moving forward. That's exactly why this deal feels so balanced. There is legitimate upside without creating long-term financial risk. Even if Brisker doesn't become a permanent piece of the defense, Pittsburgh still has multiple options beyond this season. They could address the position through the NFL draft, pursue another veteran in free agency, or develop someone already within the organization. Nothing about this signing forces the Steelers into a difficult future decision, which makes the move even more attractive. There is one more aspect of the safety room that deserves attention though, because Brisker's health history naturally puts additional pressure on the team's depth chart. Behind the projected starters, there are still significant questions. Darnell Savage has struggled over the past several seasons. Sebastian Castro remains an unproven player at the NFL level despite his intelligence and football instincts. Robert Spears-Jennings is a rookie with impressive physical tools, but is still developing after inconsistent film during his final college season. If Brisker were forced to miss time, the Steelers could certainly move Jalen Ramsey back to safety, but doing so would also remove one of the biggest advantages this new defensive structure creates. Ramsey's ability to dominate the big nickel role is one of the reasons this entire defensive setup appears so promising. Moving him back to safety would force another adjustment throughout the defense. That's why